My dear child, there is a saboteur beneath the structure of your destiny right now, cutting the cables that hold everything together. And I sent Archangel Michael to intercept him before the final cable is severed. Tonight, do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal explains every collapse you have experienced at the worst possible moment, every breakthrough that disintegrated at the threshold, every opportunity that buckled under the weight it was supposed to carry, just as you were stepping onto it. The pattern was never random. It was surgical, and the surgeon has been operating beneath the surface of your life, in a darkness your natural eyes cannot penetrate. Someone has been cutting your cables, and tonight Michael is stopping it. Your destiny is a structure. I designed it, I built it. I reinforced it with cables that run beneath the visible surface, load-bearing connections that hold the weight of everything I planned for your life to carry. The structure itself is sound. The design is flawless. But a saboteur has been moving in the darkness beneath it, identifying the cables that carry the most weight, positioning his blade at the points of highest tension, and cutting with a precision so surgical that the collapse appears to be a structural failure rather than an act of targeted destruction. You have been blaming the structure. The structure was never the problem. My beloved child, every time something collapsed in your life at the moment it should have held, every time the floor gave way beneath a step that was supposed to be your breakthrough, it was not because what I built for you was weak. It was because something beneath the surface cut the cable that was holding it up at the exact second you placed your full weight on it. Stay here. What I reveal next is which cable the saboteur is targeting tonight, and why Michael was deployed with combat orders before the blade could finish its work. Type intercepted if you have been experiencing a pattern of things collapsing at the worst possible moment. And God just named what has been operating beneath your destiny with a precision your natural eyes could never have detected. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The saboteur has been operating beneath your structure for longer than the pattern of collapses suggests. Because the first cables he cut were not load-bearing, my beloved child. He started with the secondary cables, the ones that carry minor weight, the connections that, when severed, produce inconveniences rather than collapses. A small setback here, an unexplained disruption there. A plan that shifted without dramatic consequence. You experience these as the normal friction of life, not as the first incisions of a saboteur testing the infrastructure for vulnerabilities before moving to the primary cables. The early cuts were reconnaissance, and you did not recognize them as attacks. I need you to understand the sophistication of what has been operating beneath your life. This is not a random force of opposition. This is a targeted, strategic, specifically assigned agent of destruction, whose orders pertain exclusively to your destiny. He was not sent to create general chaos in the world and happened to stumble into your infrastructure. He was dispatched with your blueprints. He knows the layout of your cables, because the enemy acquired intelligence about the structure I designed for your life and assigned a specialist to dismantle it from underneath. My child, you have a dedicated saboteur, and that should tell you something about the value of your structure. The enemy does not assign specialists to ordinary structures. He does not invest strategic resources in undermining buildings that carry nothing of significance. A saboteur operating with this level of precision, this duration, this patience, this knowledge of cable placement, is only dispatched against structures that pose a genuine threat to the enemy's territory. Your destiny threatens something, and the something it threatens has been funding the saboteur's operation beneath your life since before the first secondary cable was cut. This message was not released as a general warning about spiritual warfare. This was deployed as a specific combat briefing for one person, whose primary cable is being targeted tonight, and whose Archangel is already beneath the structure, hunting a saboteur who does not know he has been detected. Type targeted if you just realized that the pattern of destruction in your life was not bad luck, but a dedicated saboteur assigned specifically to your destiny. And the sophistication of the attack tells you the value of what he has been trying to destroy. I have been watching the saboteur's movements beneath your structure since the first secondary cable was cut, my dear one. And I have been tracking every incision with the precision of someone who designed the cables and knows exactly which ones have been compromised, not from a distance. From directly above the structure, looking down through the framework I designed, monitoring the tension levels in every cable, detecting the micro-shifts in load distribution that occur when a saboteur severs a connection that was carrying weight the adjacent cables must now absorb. I see every cut, I feel every shift, and I have been counting the cables that remain. My beloved child, I watched the saboteur locate your infrastructure months ago. He did not arrive loudly. He arrived the way saboteurs always arrive, through a vulnerability in the perimeter so small that a natural eye would never identify it as an entry point. A moment of discouragement that created a crack in your spiritual defenses. A night of doubt that opened a gap just wide enough for something to slip beneath the surface and begin its reconnaissance of the cable system. I watched him enter, and I began preparing Michael's deployment in the same hour. You may wonder why I did not stop the entry, why I allowed a saboteur to access the underside of a structure I built with my own hands. The answer is not negligence. The answer is intelligence. A saboteur who is intercepted at the perimeter is replaced. Another is sent. The entry point is studied, and a different vulnerability is exploited. But a saboteur who is allowed to enter and tracked to his target reveals the enemy's entire operational plan. Which cables are prioritized, which sequence of cuts is planned, which moment of maximum load has been selected for the final severing. I let him in so Michael could learn the full plan before executing the intercept. My child, tonight Michael knows every cable the saboteur intended to cut, every sequence he planned to follow, and the exact moment he selected for the final severing. The intercept is not a reaction. It is an ambush. Type ambush if you just understood that God allowed the saboteur beneath your structure not out of negligence, but to track the full plan. And Michael is now executing an ambush that addresses every cable the enemy intended to cut. I know what the collapses have been doing to the way you trust your own ability to build, my beloved child. Not the collapses themselves. Those were painful enough in the moment. The aftermath, the quiet, devastating recalculation that happens inside a person who watches something they built, with their best effort and their deepest faith, give way at the moment it was supposed to hold. The recalculation does not question the circumstances. It questions the builder. Something must be wrong with how I build. That is the conclusion you reached, and it has been governing your confidence ever since. I watched the first major collapse, not the secondary cable cuts. Those produced inconveniences you absorbed without existential crisis. The first primary collapse, The moment when something significant that you had invested time, energy, faith, and identity into buckled, without warning, at the exact second the weight of your future was placed upon it. Your face did not show what your spirit processed, because what your spirit processed was not disappointment. It was confirmation. The collapse confirmed something your insecurity had been whispering, that what you build does not hold, that your hands produce structures that look sound, but carry an invisible flaw that reveals itself at the worst possible moment. My child, the invisible flaw was never in your structure. It was beneath it. I saw you rebuild after that first collapse with a determination that broke my heart. Not because the determination was misguided, but because the rebuilding addressed the wrong problem. You reinforced the visible structure. You added stronger materials to the parts you could see. You improved the surface design with the precision of someone who is certain the failure was architectural and is determined to engineer it out of the next attempt. But the saboteur was not cutting visible architecture. He was cutting invisible cables, and a builder who reinforces the visible while the invisible is being severed will experience the same collapse with better materials. You have been building better structures on top of compromised cables, and the repeated collapses have been teaching you the wrong lesson about who you are as a builder. The deepest wound the saboteur inflicted was not the destruction of what you built. It was the destruction of your belief that you are capable of building anything that lasts, my dear child. That wound has been operating beneath your confidence the way the saboteur operates beneath your structure, invisibly, surgically, cutting the load-bearing cables of your self-trust one collapse at a time, until the internal framework that once held the weight of your ambition could no longer support the faith required to try again. You have been sabotaged twice, once beneath the structure, once beneath the builder. I watched the second collapse produce the doubt that the first one merely introduced. After the first, you questioned the structure. After the second, you questioned yourself. After the third, the one that dismantled something you had built with more preparation and more caution and more strategic reinforcement than either of the previous attempts. You stopped questioning and started concluding. I am the problem. My hands produce things that cannot hold, my beloved child. That conclusion is the saboteur's masterpiece, because a builder who concludes that their hands are the problem stops building, and a destiny that stops being built is a destiny that no longer needs its cables cut, because the builder has done the saboteur's work for him by ceasing construction voluntarily. You almost stopped building entirely. I watched you approach the edge of that decision, the moment where the exhaustion of rebuilding what keeps collapsing nearly exceeded the drive that has been pushing you to try again despite a track record that your confidence can no longer explain. The drive that kept you building was not stubbornness. It was the structure itself, designed so deeply into your identity that your hands build the way your lungs breathe. You could not stop, not because you are foolish, because building is what I hardwired into your design, and hardwiring does not respond to the saboteur's conclusions about the builder. Your hands were never the problem, and the one who has been cutting your cables just met someone who cuts back. Type still building if you have been rebuilding what keeps collapsing, blaming your own hands for failures that were never architectural. And you are still here because something hardwired in you refused to stop building even when every collapse told you to quit. The collapses were never evidence that your structure was flawed. They were evidence that your structure was threatening enough to justify a saboteur operating at the highest level of precision. My dear one, I need to permanently reframe the narrative your self-doubt has been writing. The story your confidence has been telling is, I built something that failed. My version of the same events is, you built something so structurally sound that the only way to bring it down was to cut the invisible cables beneath it, while the builder was not looking. Those are opposite stories told about the same collapses, and only one of them is true. A saboteur does not operate beneath a weak structure. A weak structure collapses on its own, without requiring strategic intervention. The fact that your destiny required a dedicated specialist cutting load-bearing cables with surgical precision at moments of maximum weight is proof that the structure itself was engineered to hold everything that was placed upon it. My child, the collapses were compliments disguised as failures, and the disguise has been too convincing for too long. And the timing of the collapses, the way they occurred at the exact moments of highest significance, rather than during periods of minimal weight. The timing was not unfortunate coincidence. It was the saboteur's operational strategy. A cable cut during a low-weight period produces a minor settling that the structure absorbs and the builder barely notices. A cable cut at the moment of maximum load produces a dramatic collapse that devastates the builder's confidence and ensures they approach the next construction with diminished faith. The saboteur was not just cutting cables. He was timing the cuts to inflict maximum psychological damage on the builder. Your collapses were timed weapons, not structural failures. Every rebuild you attempted after a collapse was an act of courage the saboteur did not expect, because his operational model assumes that a builder who experiences a precisely timed collapse at the moment of maximum significance will not have the resilience to reconstruct. You reconstructed every single time, and the saboteur had to return to the cables because your hands would not stop building. Michael is beneath your structure right now, and the saboteur does not yet know he has been detected, my beloved child. Something shifted in the spiritual atmosphere around your life within the last 72 hours. Not a dramatic shift, a tactical one. The kind of shift that occurs when a warrior enters an operational space, with orders to observe before engaging. Moving through the darkness beneath your structure, with a silence that the saboteur's detection systems cannot register because Michael operates at a frequency above the saboteur's sensory range. The hunter is in the building, and the prey does not know. I need you to feel what is happening beneath you right now. The cables that the saboteur was targeting, the ones that hold the weight of what I am about to release into your life, those cables are still intact. Not because the saboteur abandoned his mission, because Michael positioned himself between the blade and the cable before the final cut could be executed. My child, the cable that was about to be severed tonight is still holding, and the weight it was designed to carry is about to be placed upon it. I have been coordinating this intercept behind the collapses your natural eyes were processing as repeated failure. While you were rebuilding visible structures and blaming yourself for their collapse, I was deploying heaven's most strategic warrior to the invisible space beneath your foundation, where the real battle has been taking place since the first cable was cut. The battle was never on the surface. It was always beneath it. And the intercept is not just a defensive action. It is the beginning of something the saboteur's intelligence did not account for, because the saboteur's operational plan assumed uninterrupted access to your cables indefinitely. He did not calculate that the commander who designed the structure would deploy a warrior capable of not just stopping the current operation, but permanently securing every cable against future cutting. What I reveal next is the specific cable the saboteur was targeting tonight, and why its survival changes everything about what your structure can now hold. Type beneath me if you just felt the shift. Something changed in the spiritual atmosphere around your life in the last few days, and you now believe it was Archangel Michael entering the space beneath your structure to intercept what has been cutting your cables. A demon was sent to kill your destiny tonight, and the specific cable he was assigned to sever is the one that holds the weight of the single most significant thing I am about to release into your life. My dear one, this is not a general attack on your spiritual well-being. This is a targeted assassination attempt on one specific cable. The cable that connects the structure of your destiny to the foundation of its most critical load. Every previous cut was preparation for this one. The secondary cables were severed to redistribute weight. The earlier primary cables were cut to increase the load on the remaining ones. And the cable that remains, the one the saboteur positioned his blade against tonight, is carrying a disproportionate share of weight, because every cut that preceded it was designed to funnel maximum pressure onto this single connection. If this cable breaks, everything collapses. Permanently, my beloved child. The reason this message carries the urgency it carries, the reason the title says tonight, the reason Michael was dispatched with combat orders rather than surveillance orders, is because the saboteur's timeline reached its final phase this evening. Every previous cut was sequencing toward this moment. Every collapse you experienced was a preparatory incision, leading to the one severance that would make the structure unrebuildable, not difficult to rebuild. Unrebuildable, because this cable connects to a foundation point that cannot be reattached once severed. And this is directly connected to your journey, the thing that is about to enter your life, the breakthrough, the opportunity, the relationship, the shift that I have been building toward for longer than you know, requires this specific cable to hold. The weight of what is coming is designed to be carried by the exact cable the saboteur was targeting tonight. The timing is not coincidental. The saboteur's intelligence identified the same cable that my provision requires, and the race between the blade and the breakthrough is what dispatched Michael with the urgency of a commander who will not lose the cable that carries everything. Michael's hand is on the saboteur's blade right now, and the blade is 1 millimeter from the cable that holds your entire destiny in place, my beloved child. 1 millimeter. That is how close the saboteur came to completing the final cut before Michael's grip closed around the weapon. The blade was positioned. The angle was calculated. The force was gathered. And in the fraction of a second between the saboteur's commitment to the cut and the execution of the stroke, Michael's hand appeared from a darkness deeper than the one the saboteur was operating in, and stopped the blade cold. The saboteur did not hear Michael coming. Saboteurs never do. I need you to feel the proximity of what almost happened tonight, not to frighten you, to awaken you to the reality that your destiny has been operating under a threat so specific and so advanced that the margin between total collapse and total preservation was measured in a millimeter and a millisecond. My child, you were that close to losing everything, and you did not even know the blade was there. Everything in this message has been building toward what happens in the next moment. The identification of the saboteur, the tracking of his operation, the deployment of Michael, the positioning beneath the structure, the surveillance that mapped the full operational plan, the patience that waited until the saboteur committed to his final target before executing the intercept at the precise moment that captures both the saboteur and the intelligence he carries. The intercept is not just stopping a blade, it is dismantling an operation. And your structure, the destiny I designed, the cables I installed, the framework I built to carry the weight of everything I planned for your life. That structure is about to experience something it has never experienced. Since the saboteur first entered the darkness, beneath it, security, real enforced, warrior-guarded security at the cable level. The next thing I speak is the moment Michael completes the intercept. And what happens to a structure whose cables are no longer being cut? Type 1 millimeter if you just felt the proximity of what almost happened tonight, and the realization that your destiny was one cut away from permanent collapse. Before Michael stopped, the blade is settling into you with a weight that tells you this message was never optional. The intercept is complete. Michael's hand closed around the blade, and the saboteur who has been cutting your cables in the dark just discovered he was never operating undetected. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the darkness beneath your structure was flooded with a light the saboteur's eyes were never designed to withstand. The moment a warrior whose combat authorization comes directly from the commander stepped out of a silence deeper than the saboteur's stealth and made his presence known with a force that ended the operation permanently. The blade is disarmed, the saboteur is intercepted, and the cable that holds your destiny is intact. I need you to feel what just shifted beneath you, the tension that has been running through the foundation of your life, the constant, low-grade instability of a structure whose cables were being compromised one by one. That tension just changed quality, not because you did anything, because the source of the instability was removed by hands that operate in a dimension your hands cannot reach. The foundation beneath you just became solid for the first time since the saboteur entered. A demon was sent to kill your destiny tonight, and Archangel Michael stopped him. Not after the final cable was cut. Before. Not after the collapse. Before the collapse could happen. Not as a repair crew arriving after the damage was done. As an interceptor arriving at the exact millisecond that separates operational from destroyed. Your destiny survived tonight by a margin so thin it could only be measured in divine timing. My child, the collapses are over. Not because you finally built a structure strong enough to withstand sabotage. Because the saboteur, who was cutting the cables beneath every structure you built, has been removed from the operational space permanently. The blade that was aimed at your future is in Michael's hand. The intelligence the saboteur carried about your cable layout has been confiscated, and the darkness beneath your structure is now occupied by a warrior whose presence ensures that no future operative will access your cables unchallenged. The cutting stops tonight, and what holds from this point forward was always designed to hold. Now that the saboteur has been intercepted, everything about how your structure operates is changing from the foundation upward, my dear child. This is what happens when a structure that has been losing cables for months suddenly stops losing them. The load that was being redistributed across fewer and fewer remaining cables, the increasing strain on connections that were never designed to carry the weight of cables that had already been cut. That strain is being relieved, not by reducing the load, by restoring the cable system to its original design specification. Michael is not just guarding the remaining cables. He is restringing the ones that were cut, the secondary cables that were severed during the reconnaissance phase, the small connections whose loss produced the inconveniences you absorbed without identifying them as attacks. Those are being reattached. The tension is being recalibrated. The load is being redistributed across the full cable system, the way it was designed to distribute before the first cut was ever made. My beloved child, your structure is being restored to factory settings, and factory settings carry more weight than the compromised version you have been operating on. The areas of your life that weakened when secondary cables were cut, the subtle losses of stability you attributed to normal wear rather than targeted sabotage, those areas are going to re-strengthen. The energy that disappeared without traceable cause is going to return. The motivation that was slowly draining from your system as cables were being severed beneath you is going to surge back as the connections are restored, and the load they were designed to carry is returned to their tension. You are going to feel stronger than you have felt in months, and the strength will have no visible cause, because the restoration is happening beneath the surface, in the same invisible space where the destruction was operating. The structure that was weakening is now strengthening. The cables that were being severed are being restored, and the destiny that was 1 millimeter from permanent collapse is about to carry weight it has never held before. Type restored if you can feel the foundation beneath your life stabilizing for the first time in months, and you understand that Michael is not just stopping the saboteur, but restringing every cable that was cut during the operation. Let me show you what your structure can hold now that the cables are restored and the saboteur has been permanently removed from the darkness beneath your foundation, my dear one. The first thing that changes is the weight capacity. You have been living inside a structure that was operating at a fraction of its designed load-bearing potential, not because the design was insufficient, but because the cables that were supposed to distribute the weight were being severed faster than your awareness could detect the loss. The structure felt fragile, the floors felt uncertain. Every step you took towards something significant carried the unconscious anxiety of someone who has learned through repeated collapse that the ground beneath them cannot be trusted. The ground can be trusted now, and your steps are about to change. The opportunities you have been approaching with hesitation, the ones that require you to place the full weight of your commitment onto a surface that has previously given way, those opportunities are going to hold. Not because the opportunities changed, because the cables beneath them are no longer being cut. The weight you place on the next step will be distributed across a fully restored cable system that was designed by a God who engineers structures to hold exactly what he places upon them. My beloved child, you are about to experience the unfamiliar sensation of something holding. The projects that collapsed at the threshold are going to be rebuilt on a secured foundation, not with more effort than the previous attempts. With the same effort, because your effort was never the variable that was failing. The variable was the invisible cable system beneath the effort. And a secured cable system, receiving the same effort you always applied, produces a result that will shock you with its stability. You built well every single time. The cables were the problem, and the cable problem has been permanently resolved by a warrior whose presence beneath your structure ensures that what you build from this point forward stands on connections no blade can reach. People are going to witness stability in your life that contradicts the pattern they watched repeat for months. And the contradiction will be visible before you explain the cause, my beloved child. The ones who watched the collapses, who saw you build and rebuild and build again with a persistence they admired, but privately doubted would produce a different result. Those people are about to see something they have never seen in your trajectory, something holding, not temporarily, not with the fragile stability of a structure that looks sound for a season before buckling under weight. The permanent, load-tested, cable-secured stability of a structure whose foundation is now guarded by a warrior the saboteur's replacement cannot bypass. They will notice because stability on a person whose pattern was collapse is the most visible transformation a life can undergo. My child, the people who quietly adjusted their expectations of you downward after each repeated collapse are going to be forced to readjust upward, because what they are about to witness will not fit inside the category they built for you during the collapse season. Connections that require structural stability to form are going to begin anchoring themselves to your foundation. There are partnerships, opportunities, and divine assignments that cannot attach to a structure whose cables are being actively compromised, because attaching to an unstable structure means collapsing with it. Those connections have been circling your life for months, aware of the structure's design potential, but unable to anchor because the foundation was under active sabotage. The sabotage ended, and the circling just became landing. Professional doors that require the weight of commitment to open are going to respond to your approach for the first time. Relational connections that need the certainty of stable ground to take root are going to plant themselves in soil that is no longer shifting beneath their feet, and the weight of what lands on your restored structure will exceed anything you placed on it during the compromised season. Your structure was always designed to hold more than you were placing on it. The cables just needed to be intact for the full capacity to become accessible. Type landing if you believe that the connections and opportunities that were circling your life, but could not anchor during the sabotage season, are now landing on a structure whose cables are restored and whose foundation is permanently secured. I need you to understand why a saboteur of this caliber was assigned specifically to your cables and not someone else's, my beloved child. Because the assignment reveals the value the enemy placed on what your structure was designed to carry. Saboteurs are not deployed randomly. They are resourced. The enemy operates a finite economy, a limited supply of operatives whose deployment is governed by a cost-benefit analysis that allocates strategic resources to targets whose destruction would produce highest return. A low-value structure does not justify the investment of a dedicated operative working at this level of precision over this duration of time. Your saboteur was expensive, and the enemy calculated your destruction as worth the cost. My child, I need you to hear what that means about who you are. The enemy looked at the blueprints of your destiny, the full design, the complete cable system, the total weight capacity I engineered into the structure, and his intelligence assessment concluded that what your structure was built to carry posed a threat significant enough to justify the deployment of a specialist whose sole assignment was dismantling it cable by cable from the inside. You are not someone whose destiny the enemy casually opposes, or someone whose destiny the enemy specifically funded an operation to destroy. I chose you for this revelation because the collapses nearly convinced you that your structure was the weakest in the room. That conclusion was the saboteur's intended psychological outcome, making the builder of the strongest structure in the room believe they are building the weakest by engineering collapses that only affect their building. The truth is the exact inverse of the conclusion. The reason your structure was the one being sabotaged, while others appeared to stand without resistance, is not that yours was weaker. It is that yours was the only one in the room threatening enough to justify the cost of a dedicated saboteur. Strong structures attract saboteurs. Weak ones are left alone. Your collapses were never proof of weakness. They were proof of a threat level so high the enemy could not afford to leave your cables intact. The doubt surfacing right now is asking the question your collapse history taught you to ask. What if the saboteur returns and the cables are cut again, my child? It sounds like this. Michael intercepted tonight. But what about tomorrow night? What about next month when a new operative is assigned? What about the next structure I build? Will it hold, or will the pattern resume the moment the protection lifts and the darkness beneath my foundation fills with another saboteur carrying another blade aimed at another cable? That doubt is projecting the past onto a future that operates under different security conditions. And I am going to dismantle it with one fact about Michael's deployment. Michael was not deployed for one night. He was stationed. My beloved child, There is a difference between a warrior dispatched for a single intercept and a warrior assigned to a permanent post. A single intercept removes one threat and returns to headquarters. A permanent stationing removes the current threat and remains, establishing an ongoing military presence in the operational space that prevents any future operative from accessing the same vulnerability. Michael is not leaving the space beneath your structure after the intercept. He is establishing a post there. The darkness beneath your destiny is now permanently occupied by a warrior whose presence functions as a continuous deterrent to any saboteur the enemy considers deploying in the future. The cost-benefit analysis that justified the original saboteur's assignment no longer produces a favorable calculation, because the cost of sending an operative against cables guarded by Michael exceeds the benefit of any destruction the operative could achieve before being intercepted. Your cables just became economically unjustifiable targets, and the doubt that says protection is temporary, that assumption is based on human protection models where resources are finite and coverage expires. Divine protection does not operate on finite resources. Michael's assignment to your foundation does not carry an expiration date. His stationing is not a limited engagement. It is a permanent reallocation of heaven's military resources to a structure whose value justified indefinite security. Type stationed if the doubt tried to convince you that tonight's protection is temporary, and you are choosing to believe that Michael was not deployed for one intercept, but permanently stationed beneath your structure to ensure no future saboteur ever accesses your cables again. During every collapse, I was not watching from above the structure while the cables were being cut beneath it. I was in the space between the saboteur and the final cable, buying time for an intercept that required patience you did not know I was exercising, my beloved child. You imagined a God who observed the collapses without acting, who watched the floor give way beneath your feet each time you stepped toward your breakthrough, and chose not to intervene, while the same blade cut the same kind of cable in the same kind of darkness, season after season. I was not observing, I was positioning. Every collapse you experienced happened because a secondary or early primary cable was cut. Those cuts were painful and costly, but they were not the final cable, not the one that carries the weight the saboteur was truly targeting. And the reason the final cable was never cut, despite the saboteur having access to the darkness beneath your structure for months, is because I was standing between the blade and the cable every single time the saboteur approached it. My child, you experience collapses, but you never experienced the collapse, and the difference was me. There were nights when the saboteur advanced toward the primary cable with a speed that would have reached it if I had not redirected his attention toward a secondary target. Nights where the blade was oriented toward the one cable that carries everything, and I placed myself in the path, not with force, but with the strategic misdirection of a commander who knew the intercept was coming and needed the saboteur alive long enough for Michael to learn the full operational plan. I sacrificed secondary cables to protect the primary one, and each secondary collapse you experienced was the cost of keeping the final cable intact until Michael could arrive. The collapses were not failures of protection. They were the strategy of a God who was willing to lose small battles to win the war. You lost battles, I won the war. And the war ends tonight with a cable intact and a saboteur in Michael's grip. I know the exact cable the saboteur cut that caused the collapse you have never fully recovered from, my dear one. And I know it because I was standing close enough to hear the sound it made when it snapped. Not every collapse carried the same weight. The secondary cables produced inconveniences that your resilience absorbed. The early primary cables produced setbacks that your determination survived. But there was one collapse, one specific, named, precisely dated collapse, that produced a sound inside your spirit that has never stopped echoing. My beloved child, I know which collapse it was, and I was closer to it than you realize. It was the one that carried a name, not just a project or an opportunity or a general setback. This collapse had a face attached to it, a relationship, a partnership, a trust that was placed on a cable your faith believed was permanent. And when the saboteur severed that specific connection, the weight that fell was not measured in lost progress, but in lost belief. You lost belief that night, not in me, in the possibility that anything you build with another person can hold. I know the exact sound the cable made when it snapped, the specific internal sensation you felt in your chest at the moment the connection gave way. A sound your body has been bracing against hearing again ever since. Every new connection you have attempted since that collapse has been tested against the memory of that sound. And the testing has prevented full weight from ever being placed on any new cable, because your system will not authorize full commitment to a connection that might produce the same snap. The cable that snapped was cut by a saboteur, not broken by the person your grief has been blaming, not weakened by your insufficient faith, cut, deliberately, by a blade that targeted the connection carrying the most relational weight, because relational collapses produce the deepest damage to a builder's willingness to trust. The God who heard the snap is the same God who just secured every cable beneath your structure with a warrior whose presence ensures that what snapped will never snap again. Type that sound if God just identified the specific collapse that echoes loudest in your spirit. The one with a name and a face. And something broke open, hearing that it was not a failure of the connection but a cable cut by a saboteur who targeted it deliberately. Now that the saboteur has been intercepted and Michael is permanently stationed beneath your structure, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it requires a courage the collapse season nearly destroyed. Build again, not cautiously, not with the hedged, half-committed, 1 foot ready-to-retreat approach that the collapses taught you to adopt as your default construction posture. Build the way you built before the first cable was ever cut, with the full weight of your faith placed on the structure without reservation, without backup plans designed to cushion the fall you are already expecting, without the internal contingency system that keeps 30% of your commitment in reserve. Because committing fully to something that might collapse again feels like volunteering for devastation. Full weight, full commitment, no reserve. My child, the reserve was necessary during the sabotage season. Holding back 30% of your commitment when an active saboteur was cutting cables beneath you was not cowardice. It was wisdom. A builder who places full weight on a compromised structure accelerates the collapse. The reservation of commitment was appropriate for a season where the cables were under active attack. But the cables are secured now, and reserved commitment on a secured structure produces a fraction of what full commitment would produce. When the next opportunity arrives, and it is arriving imminently, because the weight it carries requires the exact cable that Michael just saved, place your full weight on it. Not 90%, with 10% watching for the floor to give way. 100%, with the confidence of a builder whose cables are now guarded by a warrior who does not sleep and does not leave, and does not permit blades in the darkness beneath the structure he is stationed to protect. Trust the cables, trust the guardian, trust the structure you always built well. And when your hands begin the work and the old memory of collapsed surfaces and the reflex to hold back activates, override it. The reflex belongs to a season that ended tonight. And the builder who overrides a reflex born of sabotage is the builder whose structure will hold what the saboteur spent months trying to prevent from ever being placed upon it. You made it to the secured structure, my beloved child, and I need you to stand on a foundation that is no longer being cut and feel what stability actually feels like after months of living on compromised ground. Feel the stillness beneath your feet, not the tense stillness of a surface you are testing before placing your full weight. The settled, load-tested, warrior-guarded stillness of a foundation whose cables are intact for the first time since the saboteur entered the darkness beneath your life. The ground is holding. And holding feels different from everything the collapse season taught you to expect. I want to thank you for something the saboteur's operation was specifically designed to prevent. Thank you for rebuilding every single time. After every collapse that the blade produced at the worst possible moment, after every flaw that gave way beneath your feet at the second, you were stepping toward what I prepared. You got up, you assessed the wreckage, and you built again. My dear child, the saboteur's operational model depended on you eventually stopping, and you never stopped. Thank you for blaming yourself rather than blaming me. I know that sounds strange, but the fact that you looked inward after the collapses rather than turning away from me means the relationship between the builder and the commander survived the sabotage. The saboteur cut cables. He did not cut the connection between you and me. And the survival of that connection is the reason Michael's deployment was authorized, because a commander protects builders who remain loyal to the blueprint even when the structure keeps falling. Let the tears come if they are forming, not collapse tears, relief tears, the specific body-level, foundation-deep tears of a person who just discovered they were never a bad builder. They were a brilliant builder on sabotaged ground, and the ground just became the safest surface their feet have ever stood on. The saboteur is intercepted, the cables are restored, the warrior is stationed, and the builder who never stopped building is standing on a foundation that will never be compromised again. Type solid ground if you are standing on a secured foundation for the first time. Tears forming for the relief of learning you were never the problem, and the ground beneath you is finally as strong as the builder who refused to stop building on it. You are not the builder whose structures collapse anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who approached every construction expecting the floor to give way, the one who held back commitment because full weight on compromised cables had taught them that trust leads to devastation, the one who watched others build successfully and concluded that something in their own hands produced structurally deficient work. That identity was intercepted alongside the saboteur who created it. You are a builder on secured ground now, and builders on secured ground produce structures that stand. The collapses that defined your trajectory were never your craftsmanship failing. They were cables being cut by a specialist whose assignment was to make the strongest builder in the room believe they were the weakest. Every collapse was a manufactured failure designed to produce real doubt in a builder whose actual output was so threatening to the enemy that a dedicated saboteur was funded to operate beneath their foundation for months. My dear child, the enemy invested in your destruction, and the investment tells you what your construction is worth. From this moment forward, you carry a different identity, not the identity of a builder who hopes the next structure will hold. The identity of a builder who knows the cables beneath their foundation are guarded by a warrior whose permanent station ensures that no blade will ever reach the connections that hold the weight of what God is placing on the structure. You build, Michael guards, and what you construct on secured cables will stand with a permanence that makes the collapse season look like the temporary sabotage it always was. The saboteur is intercepted, the cables are restored, The guardian is stationed permanently, and the builder, who never stopped building despite every engineered collapse, is now standing on the most secure foundation their feet have ever touched, ready to construct the destiny that a demon was sent to destroy and a god refused to let fall. Your hands were never the problem. Your cables were under attack, and the attack just ended at the hands of a warrior whose combat orders came directly from a god, who looked at the blueprints of your destiny and declared, "This structure will not fall. Not tonight. Not ever. Build, my beloved child. Build without reservation. Build with the full weight of faith that the collapse season compressed, but never destroyed. Build on cables that a warrior is guarding, and watch what your hands produce when the saboteur beneath them is no longer cutting what they are constructing. What you build next will be the first thing you have ever built on fully secured ground, and it will stand forever. Subscribe to this channel so that every time a saboteur targets your cables, the warning reaches you before the blade reaches the connection. You are not a builder whose structures collapse anymore. You are a builder whose foundation is guarded by Archangel Michael himself. The next message carries the blueprint for what God is placing on your newly secured structure, and the weight of what is coming will prove that the cables were worth every second of the battle that saved them. Type secured if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the collapses were sabotage, not failure, the builder was never the problem. The cables are restored, the warrior is stationed, and the destiny that a demon was sent to kill tonight is the same destiny that God just secured with a force that ensures it will never be cut again.